this story goes back quite a long way, back to at least 2015, maybe 2014, actually, when there was a change of leadership at Keele. So around the time that I arrived, where there was a fundamentally different approach to working with the local area that was an aspiration. And I think what you'll see as I go through this presentation is that we have, I'm not sure we consciously decided on, but we have effectively pursued an approach to agreements with civic partners, and civic as a very, very broad term, on a thematic basis. I wouldn't say it was a sector basis, it was a thematic basis. And the reason for that was that clearly it's a challenge enough in developing relationships, working up highly complex formalized agreements with a small group of partners, but very different to trying to do that across a broad portfolio. I really kind of admire Nottingham for their ambition. I think what we did was much more in bitable chunks. So this is what the Keele Deals look like. 2 years at least of solid work on the Keele Deal economy, the first one before we reached a deal. And then we've kind of rattled through culture, health, about to agree a recovery deal. I mean, we've effectively agreed it, soft agreement, and then potentially inclusion next year. And they've all had a slightly different geography, and I think we've probably taken a fairly pragmatic approach to how we do that. I mean, I'd suggest that it's probably more of an art than a science. And it is a lot about, well, where are the resources? Where's our reach? I think health has a much more ambitious reach because, we do have a set of relationships that is across a broader geography. With Keele Deal Culture, it was simply about the focus of the City of Culture bid from Stoke-on-Trent, which also included Newcastle-under-Lyme, and that needing to be quite a tight area of focus. But on much of what we do is the focus, because the sets of partners there we've got long-established relationships with, and of course the LEP is an absolutely critical partner in terms of funding. So what I'm going to do is just kind of go through each of them, and I think we've been asked to just reflect on some of the lessons learned and some of the features of civic agreement, those wonderful tests which are absolutely right, and ours, what we were doing preceded all of that, of course, and just put up some of the lessons and some of the features. But Paul, when we spoke, was quite interested in sharing some of the wiring behind the scenes, so I think we've got quite a lot there. And that's just the nuts and bolts of how you get through something like this. So the Keele Deal economy was our first big ambitious agreement, the first opportunity to really think about what the area needed, what it was that the university could do to start to deliver to address those needs, and the creation with a lot of benefit from ERDF funding. We've now got, I think, the third largest regeneration programme in the country, and we're a relatively small university, helping us to deliver that. But of course, we sit just outside Stoke-on-Trent. There are clearly some profound issues, although it's a mixed picture. And we picked up some of those. We did our, what the usual analysis. I think at that time there wasn't necessarily any kind of really strong understanding in the local area about the role of innovation in driving, and there were pockets, but not that kind of broad understanding of the role of innovation in driving growth. And of course, all of the statistics, and this sounds horribly deficit in the way we explained it, but these are profound economic challenges that did need to be addressed in the business space. That had a very, very strong theme in very low levels of business related innovation. And we took the view that, we could do what a lot of universities are doing, and which is work with companies who are receptive to and perhaps doing R&D already and scale in that way, but that really wouldn't be addressing the issues in the local area. And so our focus, not exclusively, but there was a strong focus on first time innovation and first time R&D, and being able to demonstrate that with companies in very practical ways, obviously relating that to some of our graduate base as well in terms of the capacity and skills in order to be able to do that and demonstrate what good research, development and innovation looked like and the value that that could add to their businesses. So far that programme, which straddles a generic programme, medical and health innovation programme, smart energy network demonstrator, I'll come back to that. And also, you know, around that bespoke collaborative research. That has engaged with, I think it's about 630 businesses to date, you know, and we were only really starting the year after the deal, so 2018, that delivery started. Drop in the ocean, really, in terms of the number of companies that there are in the local area. That's not an approach that many universities would take. We felt was very important, and also to build leadership capacity, to lead innovation in businesses in the local area through a project that we called Mercia Centre for Innovation Leadership. We created an easy way in. This is the updated version of that. We've had a business gateway in place since about 2017, I think. Now that's a single point of contact here. What sits behind that is a team of 12 specialist brokers. And I'll come back to capacity over and over again, because there is no way that we would have been able to even resource the brokerage, let alone delivery, without the capacity that ERDF funding enabled. This is the up-to-date version that kind of includes a link into other forms of research and expertise, as well as careers and workspace for good science. Perhaps one of the big success stories, and not a surprise given the nature of it, but some lessons here, I think, was SEND, the Smart Energy Network Demonstrator. Some of you will know about that. And that was an on-campus facility that was aiming to lead the way in new approaches to localised smart energy. I won't go into the science of that, I probably couldn't, but also to deliver a very, very large chunk of the CO2 reduction in the local area. And to do that in a way that supported the transition into the low carbon economy, but also R&I for local businesses, because that was an area of well, comparative advantage probably isn't the word, but you know, we in the local area do have you know, quite a strong group of small businesses that feed into energy supply chains in the energy market. That was followed by, I mean, you know, amazing how it took off in terms of then the interest from much larger partners. So what started off as something that was about supporting SMEs has grown into a national, in fact international, set of relationships with some really significant industry partners. So High Deploy, which was the injection of 20% hydrogen into the gas supplies trial, that first happened at Keele, and we're still involved in that project with partners you can see here. And then we had the first opportunity with our partner NG, who are a really valued partner to us, to take it off campus and start to look at what that would look like, that transition would look like in a small town of Rugeley. So this is we're part of the Prospering from the Energy Revolution programme there. And I think what that showed us is that you can start with a very local focus and what might be seen as a not particularly interesting from a traditional academic focus, and very quickly the scaling of projects that both add value to what you're doing locally, but also create opportunities for growth and development to expand your international reach in a slightly more traditional way as a university. And this is an example of one of the areas that was working alongside this, where we were able to kind of leverage all of those relationships that developed as a result of SEND and secure this Horizon 2020 project led by one of our mathematicians, Maria Heckel, who pulls together EU network. The other, so that's just one example of one kind of key project that came out of that. The other thing that I would say about the first Keele deal is that we thought very carefully about evaluation. There were ERDF projects. We had to do summative evaluations that were independent. Those were very, very useful pieces of work in understanding our economic impact and in gathering from all of the participants in those programs and the other stakeholders around them in a very organised way feedback about the programme and what it meant. So some very rich information there. We already had our governance in place, and that's quite light touch. That generally consisted of, when we could meet together, dinners of all the kind of signatory partners, and that was the local authorities and the local hospital. But I think there's a lesson to us that those can often be very polite, and you really do need lots of different ways to evaluate whether you are achieving not just, you know, that economic impact, but whether that's understood, whether it's welcomed, whether it's whether there's pride there. I think it goes back to some of the original thinking. So we established a Breaking the Mould award to showcase and recognise some of the work that we did. And I think what we wanted to do was to use that and a variety of other means just to build that community. I mean, you know, that overused word ecosystem. But it is, you know, at the heart of that, it is people feeling as though they're part of something that's making a difference. And also, you know, can be an environment that is fun and relaxed enough, and I hate that word fun, being a bit of a grace, for people to really enjoy being part of it and to see it as fundamentally different and from something that they might have been part of. This is not men in blue suits. This is not the kind of attitude that we're trying to create. It's an inclusive environment. The next Keele deal was culture. I mean, that was on the back of a cultural strategy, and I think Trevor McMillan, our Vice Chancellor, often used the term arts for posh people to describe what had been our Arts Keele programme. Lots of people who had a historic relationship to Keele had worked there, potentially, who were kind of coming to concerts every month during the winter season, and you know, quite a lot of grey heads. Not that there's anything wrong with that. There were some exciting things going on there, and you know, we'd left behind a kind of fine arts education 20 years ago, so there were lots of questions about whether we even needed to do it. But of course, Stoke-on-Trent was going for City of Culture at the time, and so we developed with external partners, and we were already starting to get quite embedded through those new relationships, a new cultural strategy with a very different approach. And I think this is probably the example that shows, you know, how brave we were in moving away from a very traditional way of working as a local authority. This is the signing of the deal. It's a cultural Keele deal. It was signed with the 3 national portfolio holders from Arts Council England and the local authorities, and the Chamber of Commerce, and of course signed on the piano in the old Spode Works, which is a centre for the artistic community, so very different. Those old-fashioned governance arrangements would not have worked for this group, and I think we tried and retested different ways of getting regular meetings in place and come to the conclusion that regular meetings don't work. This is a community that engages with us by doing, and that's how we keep in touch with them. There were still metrics attached at that point, and I think we're certainly on track around those, but that was for a slightly different audience. But a couple of examples of stuff that we did that, you know, at the time felt quite brave and could have failed, very, very risky for us. So the first one was, we had at Keele over 3 counties being Cheshire, Shropshire and Staffordshire, quite well-heeled areas there, who came to Keele, and we organised an open art show. Actually, I think it's the biggest in the country in terms of the number of clubs and societies that were part of that show, professional artists and amateur artists who were coming together. And we took it to what, as you can see here, is a beautiful building there at the top in the mother town, which is Burslem. Historic links. Susie Cooper and Clarence Cliff were training this Performance School of Art, now owned by an Academy Trust, the Wedgwood Centre over the road. Absolutely beautiful environment if you just look at those pictures. And then you walk around the corner and you see that this is what faces you. And there are some people who don't go into these areas any longer because for a variety of reasons, and I think we all kind of understand what that might be. The local regeneration trust, led by Joan Wally, who's a local MP, absolutely immense efforts, but a long road and a long struggle to get the resources in, regenerate the local area, and also some profound things happening in the retail base at the same time. And we can't solve these problems as a university. What we could do was invite those hundreds and hundreds of well-heeled people to come to this area and to create some life. Create an exhibition that ran throughout the summer for families and children who we know from feedback. Many had never stepped into an art gallery in their lives. For them to enjoy that and to have something free to engage with over the school holidays. More recently, of course, the issues around town centres much more troubling, particularly around COVID. This is the same exhibition. This is 3 counties. This is recycling. This is working with one of our national park portfolio organisations, Project's Appetite, to bring it to light up what were quite dark and dim streets in 3 areas, including Stoke-on-Trent and Newcastle-on-Tyne, and that becoming on campus. We also set up, this is not new to many universities, but in our area, the first ever university-related, knowledge-related festival. And in the second year, we had 700 people visiting that over the course of 2 days and 90 events. I think we would have been happy with 10 events over the course of that festival, but that's really taken off and is developing and evolving every year. Value that it's adding. I think there's something to be gained from doing it. The Keele Deal Health, which is the most recent one, and you can see from the timing of this that just a lot of the development work just preceded the pandemic. I'm just going to kind of take you through. There is this kind of sense. It's easy to think from the outside world, and I'm thinking about our local partners as much as anything, and the public, that Keele Deals just emerged, that suddenly there's a signing ceremony and they just happen. But that's on the back of quite a lot of, really detailed work that does relate to the civic tests and, a sense of responsibility to create a partnership, even if there are inevitably limits and tensions in every partnership. So this platform, you'll obviously get copies of the slides available, I think. It could be quite difficult for you to see, but that sets out in probably quite simple terms what that journey looked like for Keele Deal Health, which was lots of informal relationships there already, a sense that there was an appetite from partners to develop a deal, a formal proposal to do so that set out the timeline to do that to our university executive committee. Then scoping, needs analysis, proposition development. That whole, for those of us who are, I suppose, in leadership positions on this, quite a lot of work to get academic colleagues, some focusing outwards already, others, needing to think about the need to address public health priorities, to understand public health priorities, as well as delivering some of the things that are closer to some of the core areas of expertise that we have. So that scoping needs analysis just did some very simple things. It looked at PHG assessments. It looked at the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment. It looked at national evidence, the national evidence base around what, and then started conversations with partners about that. So that feedback and refinement of the proposition this is the final one. This is the proposition, the basis for the deal. That's version 11. So that's the amount of work that went into engaging with partners, soft engagement with partners, before we were able to launch the deal. There was a kind of glimmer of a moment here where I thought, oh God, the Keele Deals do pass the public test, Civic University public test. David Bean from Health Education England helped us launch this deal, and you couldn't make this story up. He said he got in the taxi at Stoke station, he came up to the university, all the way to the university, the taxi driver was telling him, yeah, Keele, its health partnerships are very important to it and they create a lot of impact. That kind of thing. What was that? No, we didn't. Did we plant that person? No, apparently not. And I think we have also alongside this placed quite a strong focus on effective PR and communications, and particularly with the local newspapers, but a variety of other means as well. So that was the launch. And then some more granular work to refine the priorities. So this was one just in February, some of the outcomes from that and the report that went from that came out of that. That involved a variety of partners, and then we had to stop, of course, because pandemic occurred. We all know the story. It will be true for many universities that a lot of work was accelerated during that period, and we're now, I suppose, starting to lift our heads a little bit to reap the rewards of some of that accelerated work and the relationships that formed from that. Not far into the pandemic, it was clear. I mean, we were all very conscious of the variety of areas of life that COVID had an impact on, and we wanted to move beyond our emergency response into thinking longer term about what we might be able to contribute. But of course, that was coming on the back of 4 or 5 years of really quite granular work with local partners. And so it was actually evolution in terms of those relationships rather than new sets of relationships. Probably the exception was food, where we've done some, a couple of academics have done some amazing work on developing local food festival, supporting the Sustainable Food Places programme, developing a network of networks for food, and then both of those academics left. And I think some of those relationships were hanging on by a thread. Really, we managed to keep them alive through an evaluation project of the Hub Foundation's holiday hunger programmes, but we're really scratching our heads to know how we kind of kept those relationships alive. And just as we're speaking, actually, is the second of a workshop with external partners to try and reinvigorate that, but with a broader agenda. And I think it would be very interesting to see how that develops. Because whereas and
I'm going to have to sort of step in because we're sort of running into Manchester in terms of the schedule for the day. I wondered if there were just any final thoughts that you'd like to share. And please do keep questions coming in the chat. It's great to see them coming through, say from Elaine, talking about the momentum. It's incredible work you've described. Anything sort of final thoughts that you could share?
Yeah, okay. I think final reflections. I think we would reflect that the civic tests are incredibly valuable. Worth remembering, though, that for us this was about organising and scaling, and capacity, resources, and delivery are absolutely key. I think you can very quickly erode trust of partners if you don't deliver. So getting the capacity and resources in place fundamentally important to us, but also effective project management arrangements, project groups have senior level buy-in and oversight to make sure that they're delivering. Skills need to change, and I think we're moving into a different era where we're looking at slightly different skills. I think I've talked about governance. I think the other thing I'd say is that dark corners of a university will persist, and that that can be quite a challenge when you're faced with the opportunities to scale up quite quickly. So I think if we were looking at this again, we would also be looking at, well, okay, how do we scale up after that initial period quite quickly, and how do we plan ahead for that?